Hey, Rudy from the Glad Trad podcast. Thanks for tuning in. And I know it's been a while. And frankly, I don't have an excuse. Actually, I do. I've been really, really busy. Moved our whole family over from Burbank out to Houston. And wow, that was a crazy experience. But I'm so thankful that Jordan was there. We drove together and Jordan helped me load a bunch of stuff, unload a bunch of stuff. Crazy story, actually. I couldn't get the pods that I needed to move my stuff to park them outside of my apartment. So what I needed to do was rent a U-Haul truck, haul all of my stuff to a separate location, and then unload at that location onto the pods. Then somebody came, picked up the pods, took them to Houston. I unloaded here. Well, my boss helped me, and so did his sons. Awesome stuff. We just got it done in an hour. And meanwhile, while all that stuff was taking its time to get here, Jordan and I drove from Burbank all the way out to Houston, which is where I am now. And we had a great time. Originally, we were going to go up through Roswell, but it turns out that on the first night, we left kind of late, there was a sudden ice storm. So it shut down a bunch of roads. All of the hotels where we were supposed to stay in Flagstaff were really expensive. I think one of them, the cheapest one, was $500 a night. So that was definitely not in the budget. So what we ended up doing is we went down south, I think following the 10. So we followed the 10 all the way through, and we stopped at Tombstone, which was sick. I would suggest anybody to go there. So cool. Lots of awesome people there and great shops. I bought some cowboy boots. Jordan, I think, bought some cowboy wine for Jen. What else did we get? We got some cigars. We had a really good time. Talked a lot about all kinds of different stuff, as you do on a road trip. It's like the best thing that you can do for your friendship, I think. I'm just going to go out and say it because you talk about all kinds of stuff. You're out there, you got nobody else to talk to. So Jordan was there. Really happy that he did that for me. So really awesome friend. I will tell you a funny story about it though. I think it was the second night. The second night we were driving. No, it was the first night because we're coming down from Flagstaff. So we're coming down from Flagstaff. It's about 11 p.m. And Jordan says, "Oh." And I look over to him and I said, "What?" And he's like, yeah, we need to get gas." So I glance over at the dashboard and sure enough, the light is on and we're in the middle of nowhere. There's like nothing around us. So sure enough, we stop at this gas station. Gas was so expensive. It was like $5 there at the time. I'm sure it's higher now in California. So we filled up kind of halfway and then we continued on our way towards the border of California and Arizona. And as soon as we passed over the border, gas was like $2 cheaper. Can you believe that? That's insane. So anyway, we had a lot of fun experiences, really, really awesome trip. But anyway, that's sort of where I've been. Also, on the other hand, married life is hard. I'm just going to go out and say it. When you're married, you're a young person going into the vocation of marriage. You have this idea of what it's going to be. You think, okay, I look at all these people around me and they're such great role models for me. And you see people with like eight children. They're like driving around in their gigantic van. And you think to yourself as a traditionalist, you say, oh, I'm going to be like that. I'm going to have 8 children. I'm going to do everything that I can. And I want to say that expectation that I had, I'm not ruling it out just yet, but it was unrealistic. And I realized that very quickly into our first year of marriage. There's a lot of things that I had expected just from what I saw outside. I expected certain things, and these expectations were way beyond the scope and merit of where we were. Just frankly speaking, I had to let my expectations die. I had to let them die because they were unrealistic. And now that we're going into Lent, today's Ash Friday, or not Ash Friday, my bad, Ash Wednesday. I've been up since like 3 a.m. So Ash Wednesday's here. And if you can see, I'm using my phone camera just out of convenience, but I kind of have, a semblance of a shadow of ash on my forehead. We went to Mass, wonderful Mass. But we're here. And all this time that we're leading into it, I'm thankful for the way that the Latin Mass prepares you for that, right? You have Septuagesima, Sexagesima, and that prepares you, gets you in this mindset that, okay, Lent is coming, I need to prepare. And what is Lent? What are we giving up? What are we doing? Those things I hope I can get into today. But back to married life. It's been hard, like we just have, we've become parents for the first time, and coming from 2 very broken families, we don't really know how to raise children. So everything that we do, it has to be done, in a sense, we're doing it for the first time, we're learning, and some of the things we've had to learn the hard way. To give you an example, we came into this thinking, okay, our baby's not going to be on formula, because we wanted to do things the natural way. We wanted the baby to be breastfed exclusively. And the way that we approached it was that the baby was going to breastfeed for exclusively every meal. We weren't going to do bottles. We weren't going to do formula, as I mentioned. And what ended up happening was we discovered kind of at the last moment, possibly, at the wrong time, like almost 4 or 5 months into it, that our baby girl had a tongue tie. And so what that does is it actually makes breastfeeding super, super painful. And so that was a cross that my beloved wife had to endure. And to a certain degree, because I'm a satellite, I had to endure that too. You have to experience your loved one suffering through something that shouldn't be this hard. And that causes tension. It causes all kinds of stuff. So we didn't discover about this tongue tie until it was too late. Really, it was just a lot of pain, staying up all night, excruciating pain. I want to emphasize that. And I'm so thankful for my wife because she's really been a trooper this whole time. So as soon as we got into Houston, we settled down a little bit, got all of our stuff out. We took our daughter to get a surgery. Basically, they laser part of the underside of your tongue. If you open your mouth and you stick your tongue up, there's like a little piece of cartilage that holds the tongue to the roof, to the floor of your mouth. And that was just too tight. So she wasn't able to latch properly. Difficult stuff, right? Well, I tell you this story to give you context as to why our first year of marriage is difficult. Well, 6 months into our marriage, we have our baby. Okay. Or 6 months into our marriage, we have conceived our baby. Another 9 months pass, and now we're parents. We're out in the world. We're doing everything hands-on. We're trying to figure it out, right? And so there wasn't a lot of like a honeymoon phase as most people have. They have like a barrier, or not a barrier. They have a period of time where they just enjoy each other. They just enjoy being married together, learning everything. And we got that in a sense, but Ashley was pregnant, but like half of the year she was pregnant. So we didn't want to wait. We didn't want to push off what the purpose of our marriage was, which is to propagate and to have children, propagate children into the world, to create a family. So that's why we jumped into it. But that came with some really serious sort of crosses that we had to bear. So it's difficult. I won't lie to you. As I mentioned, seeing your loved one suffer is not easy. And when you're suffering, it's very difficult for you to be rational, to give yourself the opportunity to to think about things, to maybe think about the situation. Those things are luxuries, really, when you're a parent. When you're trying to figure out how you're going to provide for the child, how you're going to spend your time taking care of the child, that sort of thing. So we had to figure that out. And once we got to Houston, there was a lot of tension between my beloved and I, and we had to figure it out. So we sat down, we talked about it, and I realized in that conversation, our expectations have to die. They have to die, and you have to take a look at yourself and be honest with yourself, what your limitations are, where you are at that particular moment in your life, what you have to do to move forward. Those are things that we had to think about and talk about as soon as we got into Houston. So anyway, that in a long way of ranting is sort of where I've been. Haven't really had a lot of time to do episodes, to do other things. On the other side of the coin, the reason why we moved to Houston in the first place is because I started working at the Guadalupe Radio Network. It's a Catholic radio station. We have 52 radio stations all over the United States, all over the major markets in New York. We're in Buffalo, here in Dallas, Houston, places in New England. So we're everywhere. And I work on this show called Catholic Drive Time. I suggest you check it out. So Catholic Drive Time is a show, and our whole purpose of being is that we cover the headlines for our Catholic audience. In a sense, I don't like to say it this way, but like in a sense, we're like the Catholic Fox News. I don't like to say that because Church Militant says that, and Fox News is kind of cringe for the most part. So I like to say that we're really trying to figure out the news and present it for our Catholic audience. So we talk about current issues, what's in the headlines, et cetera, et cetera. We keep an eye on the things that typically get memory hold. So I've been working here for about, I started in November. I was working remote from California. So when I was in California, I was waking up at 2 a.m. because there's a 2-hour time difference. And that was crazy. And then moving here was crazy. And now here I live about 8 minutes from the studio. So I wake up around 4 in the morning, get ready, get going. I get to the studio. My typical day in the studio looks like this. I get there at around 5. And I rehearse the news stories that I pull the night before. So the night before, I compile all the news stories that are coming out, and I rewrite all of the story so that it's my words, because I'm gonna be on air, repeating the story. And if I'm just like reading off of the article, it's kind of boring. It doesn't really make sense. So I get there around 5, rehearse my stories. Get ready to go at around 5:55, set up my station, pull my mic in and all that stuff. Talk to the host of the show, my boss, Joe McLean, really awesome guy, best boss I've ever had. Talk to Adrian, who's the producer, really good friend. And we figure out where we're going to go in the show. And so the show is really awesome. I suggest, if you haven't checked it out, it's really a good way to stay informed and inspired. That's our tagline for the show. So that's what brought me out to Houston in the first place. And it's been an awesome experience. I thank God so much, because part of the reason that I took the job in the first place is, really, it's a crazy thing. Like jumping from photography to being in a radio station, that's a huge jump. But the reason I took it is because it was an opportunity for me to step up as a man and provide for my family. My beloved, she doesn't want to work anymore. She learned that the hard way. Maybe I'll do an episode on that. She doesn't want to work anymore. She wants to fulfill her vocation as a mother. She wants to be a mother. And it's hard to do that when you're working outside of the home. So she said, no, I want to work. I don't want to work. I want to stay at home. And I said, okay, we're going to pray hard, And we're going to see if there's an opportunity that comes up where we can make that happen. And sure enough, God was good. God answered our prayers, and he gave me this opportunity here in Houston. So I nabbed it up real quick. It was scary to think about leaving everything that you know, everything that you're so used to, the place where you grew up, and everything that you're familiar to. Really scary stuff, but I wouldn't change a thing now that I'm here in Houston. It's a free state. I haven't had to wear a mask this whole time. Really awesome experience here. Houston, the city, is not all that great, to be honest with you. I think there's like, I think it doesn't feel like Texas sometimes. Like, people are not as nice here, but I think that's just city living. So anyway, let's jump back into Lent. I want to talk about Lent. That's the whole reason I started talking about this. Okay. When it comes to that story of letting your expectation die, your expectations that are unrealistic, I want to circle back to that and say, in relation to your spiritual life, in the same way, you never know you're lost until you realize that you're not on the trail anymore. There was a time I was hiking up the Mount Whitney Trail with a good friend of mine. I've lost contact with him, really. He was a good friend of mine, Patrick. Patrick and I used to go out to Death Valley. We would go out to the desert. We would go out to the forest. We would hang out. We would hike. We'd do all kinds of outdoorsy stuff together. Really, really an awesome friend. I looked at him as a sort of a big brother. And one day, we got the opportunity to hike Mount Whitney. And Mount Whitney is the tallest mountain in the lower 48 states. The elevation, I believe, is somewhere close to 14,000 feet. And the hike itself is about 8 miles. So what you're doing is you're going up the whole of the 8 miles. It's almost as if you were climbing stairs the whole way. It's relentless. It was crazy. And we got to our campground the first night. I want to say it was like somewhere halfway in between the trails. So we only hiked 4 miles in an entire day. It's like pathetic. But it was tough. It was a really tough thing. We weren't conditioned for it. We got there on the first night, and then the next morning we woke up. We started going on the trail again, and about three hours into the hike, we realized we were no longer on the trail. And I think that is one of the most terrifying things that you can ever experience if you're ever out in the wilderness. To realize that you are no longer on the trail is terrifying, because then you start scrambling. You're trying to figure out how to get back on. How do you do that? Well, it's the same way with our spiritual life, right? We slowly start deviating off of the path that God desires us. And sooner or later, we find ourselves in situations that feel like we're off of the trail, like we're completely lost. And you don't know, that's the insidious thing about it. You don't know when you've jumped off the trail until you do. That's why every Lent we're thinking about what we have to give up. We think about all of our distractions. We think about all of those things that prevent us from having the time to pray, the time to think about the eternal. That's why people give up television. That's why they give up social media. Because we spend so much time on these things that I think in the short term give us some sort of satisfaction. They give us some sort of pleasure and entertainment. But really they distract us from our spiritual life. Lent is not an opportunity for you to do what's called self-improvement. Self-improvement would be something like, I'm going to eat more vegetables, or I'm going to stop eating cookies and that sort of thing. Like, that's self-improvement. Lent is something, it's an opportunity, rather, for us to think about the eternal, yes, but also to subjugate our bodies, to subjugate our will, which is so powerful most of the time, to our intellect. So it's not a time for us to think about self-improvement in the sense that, it's like people, instead of giving things up, they say, oh, I'm going to exercise instead. That's not what Lent is about. Lent is a time for you to reflect about your spiritual life, to reflect on that pathway that is set by Christ himself. There's concrete steps for you to achieve holiness. And there's a pathway to that. And we often deviate from that pathway. And we don't know that we've deviated until we're lost. So Lent is an opportunity to get to know yourself, to understand where your limitations are, what your expectations are. Maybe you need to give some of those things up. But most importantly, to know yourself. I'm going to say something that seems contradictory to what I just told you. I'm giving up sweets. It's a problem for me. I love snacks. I snack mindlessly. It's pleasure. It's pleasurable. I enjoy it. But I'm not giving it up in a sense that, oh, I need to give it up because I need to lose weight. I'm giving it up because I need, like I said, to subjugate my will, which is so strong, to my intellect. It's an opportunity for me to say, body, you are not in control of me. I am in control of you, body. And so as we enter into Lent, I would like to invite you to think about this pathway to holiness. Think about what we have to do to achieve that, right? And how often we fall off of the track. We want to avoid suffering. We want to say, no, I don't want to suffer. I don't want to experience this pain. I don't want to give stuff up because it's difficult and arduous. I don't want to understand myself because that would take too much time. And frankly, I don't know if I have it in me to change the way that I am. This is an invitation to you as we begin Lent to look at yourself, really examine your mind, examine the way that you talk to people, the way that you react to things, the way that you pray, or the lack of prayer that you have in your life. This is an invitation to do those things, to learn about yourself, and to really make a plan to get yourself out of this situation where you are lost and you're off the track. And when it comes to suffering, we don't want to suffer through that experience of looking at ourselves. We don't want to suffer through the things that we have to change. Like in my situation, I don't look forward to Lent, even though I should. It's a wonderful time, and Holy Mother, the Church, in her wisdom, gives us this time to do just that, to suffer, to cut away all the things that prevent us from having an authentic relationship with God. Nobody likes to suffer. But suffering often is the door for conversion. Suffering is the door by which we have to go through in these 40 days so that we can truly return back onto that pathway that God has set out for us. And so when it comes to prayer, prayer is a means for you to maintain a relationship with God. Our souls are nourished with prayer. Setting time aside for prayer is something that we need to do the way that we set time aside for eating and drinking, because it has the same effect. Food nourishes our body, keeps us alive, it helps us to think. Prayer, in the very same way, it feeds the soul, allows it to grow and flourish. And just think, if we made the same amount of time that we do to grab a meal for prayer, how much less our soul would be starving all the time. Just think about that. As a family man, I must admit that I have failed most of the time that we've been married to keep our family, to lead our family in prayer. That's something that I hope to reestablish during this Lent, to find the time despite all of the limitations of time that we have right now, as I explained. But to do it in a way with an understanding that this is something that I need for my soul, otherwise it's going to starve. And I hope that you take this time of Lent not only to examine yourself and all the things that are preventing you from getting back on the path, but also to spend time in prayer with God, communicating with God. Another example of this would be in a relationship. The thing that is most important is communication. If there's no communication in a relationship, there tends to be a disconnection, tends to unravel itself. Well, we have to think the same way when we think about prayer and our relationship with God. How else do we communicate that way? How else do we communicate to God, rather? Oftentimes God is just something minor in our life. Sometimes our life is so chaotic and hectic that we don't even give ourselves the time to think about eternity. And that's our whole reason for being. We have to cut everything out. We have to carve the time for our relationship with God. And despite it being a painful, difficult thing to suffer through, of changing, of really getting back on track, suffering builds humility. And so that's why these penances that we give ourselves during Lent, they are meant to hurt us a little bit. Lent should hurt a little bit, or maybe a lot, depending on what you need. It's a denial of yourself. And the more you suffer, the easier it is for you to build humility in that suffering. So suffer well. I think about all of the opportunities that we've had to suffer through in our first year and change of marriage. Was it all for nothing? I don't think so. Did we go through all of that just for nothing, just to suffer because we're nihilists and that's just life, or stoics, like, oh, we just grin and bear it? No. I think that suffering is a wake-up call. I think that suffering was an opportunity for us to offer that for the conversion of sinners, like Our Lady of Fatima mentioned when she visited the shepherd children in Fatima. And she showed them all of the souls falling into hell because nobody had anyone to pray for them. They fell into hell like snowflakes. It's a beautiful thing to see snow falling, I'll tell you that. And if you've been out into the snow and you've seen the snow begin to fall from the sky, it is really, really crazy to be in a flurry. One time, to go back to a story about Patrick, One time we were out in this really severe snowstorm, and it just was blizzarding. That's what it looked like in the pits of hell. That's how many souls there were falling into there, because they had no one to pray for them. And so suffer well. These opportunities that we have where there's so much suffering in our life, it almost seems unbearable. Those are opportunities that we can offer for the conversion of sinners. The hardest hearts that you've ever experienced, they need your prayer too. As difficult as it is to think about those people, I think, and this is me speaking just by myself, just about myself, the way that I view the world. I look at our enemies, and I don't love them. Even though our blessed Lord told us, love your enemies. I don't love them. I see them as other. I see them as if they have lost all of the luster of their soul. And most of them have. They've lost the luster of their soul. They've lost a sense of who they are. You look at people who deny the very reality of who they are. They become something else. It's an ugly thing to see. But that person may end up in hell. And when I suffer, and we suffer a lot, it's an opportunity for me to offer that for that person. And to see them more as a person rather than another. And so remember, this isn't a time for self-improvement. It's a good thing on its own, but Lent is a time of penance. Learn about yourself, your defects of virtue that you have, and find the opposite of what you need, of what you are. I think about sweets. I'm so intemperate. I need to build that virtue of temperance. That's what I'm going to work on during Lent. And remember that there is a war for your soul. There is a war going on, whether you know it or not. Most of the time you don't know it because these things are unseen. God pours out so many graces on you every single day, and he awaits for you to correspond to that grace. But oftentimes we don't. And when we do, we find consolation. When we don't correspond to grace, we find desolation. And when we are in desolation, the spiritual forces that are unseen, they can see that. They can't read your mind, but they are so intelligent. They can see your weakness when you are in desolation. And there's a war for your soul. Remember that as we enter into Lent. Think about the eternal. Where do you want to end up? Because remember, as you receive the ashes, the priest says, remember, man, that you are dust, and unto dust you shall return. From dust you came, dust you will return. Think about eternity. Make this the Lent where you really change yourself. Not in a self-improvement sense. Exercising more. Those things are good. That's fine. But think about what you can change about your outlook, about your soul. Those things that really, really need to change. Think about that this Lent. Hopefully that was enough to inspire you to begin this Lent in a really awesome way, in a serious way, thinking about eternity. And if you like what I had to say, and generally speaking, what the Glad Trad podcast has to say, subscribe to us. become a patron. Becoming a patron unlocks some awesome perks. And the other thing that you can do is keep us in your prayers. If you really, really, really liked what we have to say, smash the like button. If you really, really, really dislike what we had to say, smash the dislike button twice. Show us you really dislike it by pushing it twice. And if you want to be a really cool, nice person, share it with a friend. Anyway, we'll catch you next time. God love you.